point, which I've been told should pop up soon. Oh, there we go. So we read a passage from Matthew this morning, looking at Jesus walking on the water, but then also Peter momentarily walking on the water as well. And I wanted to spend a bit of time pulling this apart, just to sort of see if there's a bit of deeper revelation that we can get from this message. So before I do that, it's probably worth looking at the lead up to these events. So leading to these events, there's been a fair bit that's happened already in Jesus' life, and especially in his ministry. So he's called his disciples. He's done a lot of teaching and healing. He preached the Sermon on the Mount. He has healed many people, including a leprous man, the centurion's servant, Peter's mother-in-law, to name a few. He's cast out many spirits himself, including one lot that entered a herd of pigs, which then ran off a cliff. He's calmed the storm. He's proved to his disciples he had authority over the winds and the waves. He managed to ruffle the feathers of all the religious leaders, so eating with sinners, picking grain on the Sabbath, just stirring a bit of trouble there that sort of didn't fit in their idea of what a teacher should do. I said again. I've got to stop that. I did it again. He sent out his disciples with the same authority that he had. So he actually has already sent his disciples out to do the same things that he'd already been doing. He taught his disciples of parables, and this is just leading up to the account that we have now. John the Baptist was beheaded by King Herod. This is the point where Jesus actually needed to get away and be on his own. And so he withdrew to be on his own, but the crowds actually followed him, and this is where he taught them, he did some healings, and then he was told his disciples told him to feed them, and he said, no, you guys feed the people. You've got authority to do this, you feed the people. And the disciples said, we've got nothing, we've got these couple of loaves and fishes, and Jesus stepped in and did the miracle and fed the 5,000. He still hasn't had time to mourn the death of John the Baptist. So this is the point where after he's fed the 5,000, he then loads his disciples into a boat and says, look, you go on ahead. I need some time out with God to be on my own, just to settle. And so he's got some time to actually mourn the death of John the Baptist. There seems to be a trend in this list where I see Jesus doing a lot of things and then him almost requiring his disciples to step in and do the same sorts of things. He was doing healings, he was casting out spirits, and then he actually gave his disciples the same authority to do the same things. There's a pattern I sort of see emerging just looking at that list of accounts. Which brings us to the current thing that we're looking at, which is Jesus going out to meet his disciples on the water. So I'm going to pick up from verse 26 in Matthew. If you've got it open there, you're welcome to read along with me. It's not really a super huge requirement, but so Matthew 14:26. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And this is my first point. Peter actually asked to be called out of the boat. It wasn't Jesus saying, "Hey, come out and walk with me." Peter actually took the step to say, "Jesus, if it's you, I want to come out there with you. I want to be out there walking on the water with you." So Peter actually requested this miracle. And I don't know what the motivation behind this request is. It could have been just his zeal. I mean, we all know that Peter was pretty bold, impatient, impulsive. You see in the different accounts. So I don't know whether this was this same zeal or impulsive behaviour. I sort of have suspicions. We've previously, when Jesus calmed the waves and the water, he actually talked about the lack of faith of his disciples. He was asleep in the boat. There was wind in the waves. And the disciples sort of woke up saying, "Look, we're about to sink because of the wind and the waves." And he said, you have little faith. and he calmed the wind and the waves. I think he was expecting them to sort of step into a level of faith that they were maybe lacking. And so I wonder if this is Peter in a similar situation. They've got the wind and the waves buffeting the boat. Jesus is walking out there and he's going, oh, it's one of these situations again. Now what do I got to do? I've got to have some faith. So Jesus, if it's you, let me come out there. I think it was him trying to be a bit bold and a bit out there. So I sort of also wonder if Jesus sort of heard this and went, he's finally getting it. He's finally getting it that all this stuff that I'm doing, I actually want him to step into doing it as well. He's finally get it. So yes, sure, come on out. I sort of wonder if that's sort of going through Jesus' head as this is all happening, because he's got a bigger plan than just walking on the water. He actually wants his disciples to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. So my question is, how often do we ask God to call us out of the boat? How often do we ask God to call us out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary? Out of the mundane, living the life as everyone else in the world does, and living a life as God has called us to live. So Peter was a seasoned fisherman, and he would have known the risks of stepping out onto the water. He would have known, you'd normally sink. Yet he called to step out there anyway. And in verse 29, we pick up, and he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. Really important point here that Peter knew Jesus' voice. He wasn't getting out of that boat for anyone except Jesus. I wonder if that's why he actually asked, if it's you, call me out. He wanted to hear that voice of Jesus to know, yes, it's Jesus calling me out, so I can follow that one. Second thing is, he knows the voice of Jesus because he spent time with Jesus. He spent time in his ministry. He spent time talking with him, listening to his teaching, just in commune with him. He knows this voice of Jesus. So if he hears that voice, he knows what it sounds like. He knows what that voice is. He knows that Jesus is serious, and so he knows he can trust that. And initially, Peter's obedience actually overtook his fear. So I'm stopping short of where he starts looking at the wind of the waves. Let's just look at the point that he actually did walk on the water. And that step would have required a huge step of faith for a fisherman that knew that when you're in the boat, you don't get out of the boat, because that's death. You stay in the boat. But he still overtook that fear with his obedience. And fear is a really interesting thing that gets in the way of most of us, I believe, for stepping out of the boat. This fear of, what are people going to think? What if it doesn't work out? Is that really you, God? Fear is something that can be really, really, really crippling. I had the pleasure of, at Christmas time last year, I was spending 2 weeks camping with friends of ours, and they had a boat, and we spent 2 weeks water skiing. And we had a few of our friends come out and visited, and there's these 2 teenage boys that were there, and they were terrified of the water. This is on the Tweed River, and we've been skiing all day. Everyone's been in, even including the little kids. My little boy Matthew even ended up getting up on 2 skis. So it was lots of fun. But these 2 teenage boys, growing, they're like 16, 17-year-old, they were terrified of this water because of sharks. They've heard all of the news stories about sharks in the Tweed River, and so they were terrified. And one of them actually didn't get out of the boat. He refused to even have an attempt at water skiing. Now everyone who visited attempted water skiing because that was the activity we were doing. We all had to go. In fact, water skiing is funny. That's probably the closest thing to walking on water I think any of us can do, and it's loads of fun, especially when you get a good feel for it. Anyway, I'm digressing. But these 2 boys were just terrified, and they missed out because they let their fear overtake this wonderful experience that was there. All they had to do was step out of the boat. So what's the boat that Jesus might be calling us to step out of? Now, I don't know what that is. That's something for you guys to ponder. But is there a boat there that you're comfortably sitting safely in, and Jesus is going, come on, I want you here. I want you to step out in faith and walk on walk on the water. Step out of the ordinary and into step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. I also had an instance with fear crippling me. I was in grade 1, and we were doing swimming, and I didn't like the deep end. Anyone else had that fear of the deep end at the swimming pool? This was at the old Gatton swimming pool. And I remember Mr. Vaughan was the PE teacher. I don't know if he's still a PE teacher at Gatton State School. He's probably retired. Okay. He was a legend. I loved that man. Anyway, we were, grade 1, it was time to go in and look at treading water in the deep end. And I was like, I don't like the deep end. And so I resisted. I said, I don't want to do this. I'm not doing this. He ended up dragging me, kicking and screaming. And I made an absolute fool of myself, kicking and screaming and pushing me in the pool, saying, no, you've got to go, you've got to face this thing. Now, we worked it out. I sort of worked out it wasn't that big a deal. I actually love swimming now. But we went through a process with my dad, Victor, where we would be going to the college pool, pretty regularly, and he would actually help me monkey along the edge of the pool towards the deep end, just to realise it's actually not that bad. And then we would get to the deep end's ladder, and we'd go down to the bottom, and then we'd go up to the top, up and down the ladder, just to show that, hey, with him, everything's safe, and you just got to take a little bit of time. It required that walking with my father to actually overcome the fear. Walking with the Father overcomes the fear. Everyone got that point? I'm trying to be clear. Okay, walking with the Father, knowing the Father's voice actually overcomes that fear. So fear is something that can be incredibly crippling. The other thing is that with calling comes provision. So Peter was called out onto the water, and with that came the provision of the ability to walk on the water. Jesus wouldn't call him out there if he didn't think he could do it. He called him out, and then there was provision for it to allow him to do that miracle. So if Jesus is calling you out of the boat to step out and overcome fear, and you're following his voice, it makes sense that there's going to be provision to do that amongst the wind and the waves. And once again, I don't know if that's sinking with someone here, and I just feel like that's the message to bring forward, but whatever your situation is, if there is a situation where you're being called to step out of the boat, Jesus will provide provision. There might be wind and waves around you that buffet you a little bit, but there should be provision there to step forward. Similar thing came with Moses. For example, Moses, when he was called, burning bush, he was given a staff that would allow him to do signs and wonders. There was provision with that calling. When he was called to lead the Israelites, there was provision. There was parting of Red Seas. There was water coming out of rocks that he struck with his staff. There was the plagues of Egypt. There was, what else have I got here? Defeating of enemies. There's this wonderful account with Moses raising his hands against the Amalekites, and when his hands were up, the Israelites were winning, and when his hands were down, they were losing. Absolutely fantastic picture of obedience, as well as glorifying God, I believe. But with that calling came provision. My second point is to beware the wind and the waves. So in verse 30, but seeing the wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Peter was walking on the water. It says there that he got out of the boat and walked, so he actually did do that little act. But he was distracted from the goal. And this is really the classic point that most people pull from this passage, and often we'll read it and just go, oh yes, this is that one where you have to keep your eyes on Jesus, and then we'll keep going forward. But I think often when we skip over passages like that, we actually miss some of the nuances there. He was distracted from the goal. He became distracted. The winds and the waves around him suddenly overtook his perspective. And so Peter's focus shifted. It shifted from Jesus to Peter. Well, that got loud. It shifted from Jesus, where his eyes should have been, to Peter and his navel. And he looked at his feet and looked at the waves and going, what am I doing? So we've got this interesting perspective. Jesus is saying, come on out in the water, come on out. I want to see you step into the extraordinary. We've got Peter going, what am I doing? I can't do this. This is impossible. And suddenly he starts sinking because he got distracted. He also started feeding this self-preservation reaction that we all tend to have. I don't know if anyone else has got it. That fight or flight reaction. So it's actually started sort of feeding that little instinct in him. And so he starts sinking. Interesting thing that the minute he starts looking at himself and going, I can't do this, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. He starts failing. And I saw this in the natural when I was looking at these people trying to learn water skiing when I was on holidays at Christmas. We get these people that would come out and we'd say, look, have a go at water skiing. Now, I'm not the best water skier. I only learnt a few years ago. Bruce, the mate that I was with, who owns the boat, he is a really, really good water skier, and he's a really, really good teacher at it too. He knows he can look at someone skiing and go, look, if you just adjusted this or do this, you're going to get it. You're so close. And spending 2 weeks with him, I started to learn the little things that people needed to do to actually stay upright on these skis, and you could sort of see it all happening. Now, we had some of his family come down and visit, and there's this boy and this girl, and before they even got in the boat, they're still on the shoreline, they said, I'm not going to be able to do this. Before they even started, I'm not going to be able to do this, can't do it. And we said, no, come on, have a go. Get in there and get in the boat and get out of the boat with the skis and the rope, and they've got vests on, and we'll have a go. And, first go, they nearly got it. But I could almost tell before we pulled them in eventually when they were in, I could tell almost as they were getting in the boat, they weren't getting up on those skis because they had told themselves already that it's not going to happen. So that's a scenario in the natural. Now this is a situation here with Peter. He's told himself, I can't do this. Of course he's not going to be able to do it because he's just told himself he can't. So his focus shifted from Jesus, who's saying, yeah, you can do this. These two kids in the water, their focus shifted from Bruce, who's on the boat, saying, you can do this. All you got to do is keep yourself upright, lean back a little bit more, bend your knees, and you'll be sweet. Their focus shifted from listening to those instructions to, I can't do this. The minute I heard them say, I failed at that, I knew it was over because they used that fail word. I hear it too often in my teaching. When I hear someone say, I failed, that's them basically telling themselves they can't do it. And it's disturbing. It just makes me so sad because they're missing out. Jesus loves us even in our distraction. So yes, Peter got distracted. He messed it up. He lost his eyes, got distracted from Jesus. Jesus still loves us even in our distraction. Jesus still stepped in and pulled him out. In fact, this is what I want to show you. This picture, I love this picture. I saw this flip up on my Facebook feed a couple of years ago, and I went, I need to find that. So I actually bought a copy of it, a digital copy, because I just loved it so much. Of Jesus reaching down into the water to lift us up. Even in our distraction, Jesus still steps in and pulls us out. He still loves us. Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, took hold of him and said, You of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. I think those words, you of little faith, I think they would have cut Peter to the core because it's the second time he's heard them. He heard them once when Jesus calmed the storm, you of little faith. He's just heard it again. In his zeal to try and step out, he stuffed up again. But that's okay, because as far as my experience goes teaching, it's when students stuff up that they learn the most. That's when the learning happens. If a student's sitting there doing every question, I'm a maths teacher if you don't know my profession, when a student's doing every question correctly, they haven't been challenged. There's no learning happening. All they're doing is proving that they know how to do the stuff that you've given them. They actually need something that pushes them to the brink of getting it wrong for some learning to happen. It's sitting on the edge of your ability is actually where the learning happens. So to hear these words, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Yes, that cuts into a core then, that's disappointing then. But Jesus is trying to raise up a man that is going to be the foundation of his church. This is Peter, this is the rock on which he was going to build his church. He wants a man of great faith in that position. So he needs to push him to the brink. He needs this man, and you see it time and time again through the Gospels. Peter gets challenged and stretched. This brings me to my final point. This is probably the biggest point I get out of this. For some reason, when I read this passage, this concept jumped out at me with like big flashing lights out the front, like a fire engine with flashing lights. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." Now, this is the first instance in Matthew where the disciples actually acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God. It's mentioned that he is the Son of God, I think, when he's being tempted in the wilderness, but not by his disciples. They don't actually proclaim him as the Son of God. But the natural reaction to the revelation that Jesus is the Son of God should be worship. It should be the place we go. Now, the origin of the word worship actually comes from a shortening of worthship. It's giving worth to something. If something is worth something, it's worthy of our praise. If Jesus is worth something, he's worthy of our praise. He has worth in our lives. He is worth everything. In Hebrews 12:28-29, therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Our God is worthy of our reverent and awe-filled praise. I was going to put awful in there, but it's got a really bad connotation. Awe-filled praise. And it's the only logical response to the revelation of who Jesus is. And ultimately, God is worth giving our glory to. In him we have salvation. In him we have victory. In him strongholds are torn down. He has already won the battle. Some of us just haven't figured it out yet, I believe. The other thing that worshipping Jesus does is it actually refocuses our attention back to Jesus. So this is this passage we've been reading in Matthew. The classic thing that people pull out of it is keep your eyes on Jesus. I think worship is a fantastic way of keeping your eyes on Jesus. If you're worshipping him, truly worshipping him, then your eyes are nowhere else but Jesus. There is nothing else. The wind and the waves don't exist. It's just him. It's a funny thing that I've found. I've just tried an experiment in the last 6 months. When I go to work, I put on my music. I've got Apple Music. Has anyone else got Apple Music? It's like the entire Apple library of music in your phone. It's fantastic. So I can get everything from secular music through to worship music. I tried a little experiment. I've gone to work listening to top 40 stuff that nice to listen to, but it's popular stuff that's on the radio. And I've gone to other days where I've listened to worship music, deep, heartfelt worship music. Now I found got out of my car to go to my office, and if I've been listening to worship music, I've got praises for Jesus, glorifying Jesus rolling around in my head as I'm walking across the car park to my office. Beautiful way of starting the day. My focus is set on Jesus when I start. And if I don't have that on, if I've got secular music on, I find I have the worst day ever. The days just seem to get hard. I make bad decisions. I have rotten lessons. But if I've put worship music on, I've started this day with this supernatural clarity that, peace that passes understanding, if you like. And I've found I've had wonderful days if I've had that rolling through my head. And it's good to have that on the way to work and the way from work. I found it's been great as a wind down from everything that's been happening as well. Worship music is great. And music is one of those things, it is, in essence, our spirit expresses itself really well through music. That's why we sing songs. But that being said, worship isn't just singing songs. Worship can be more than just singing songs. It can be something else plus singing songs. I started looking at this. Where else have I seen references to worship in the Bible that I can, I want to get a deeper picture of worship, what it means to worship Jesus. The first one I found was worshipping Jesus is actually sacrifice of ourselves. Romans 12:1. I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. To be a sacrifice, to allow God to have control of your life. That's worship. To be obedient to God in our action. I believe that is worship. Mark 8:34, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I believe that is worship. Taking up our cross, taking up our stuff, whatever is laying us down and following him. Being obedient is worship. It's also mental, I believe. I think worship is a bit like a hard reset. Now, this is Romans 12:2. The passage I read before was Romans 12:1, where it's talked about offering your bodies as a living sacrifice. This is 12:2. This comes immediately after it. So, in linking that to, they've just been talking about spiritual act of worship, and then he talks about renewing your mind. So do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. That renewing of our mind, it's like a hard reset. Now, I describe hard reset. We've got these, I've got it here. This is a Microsoft Surface Pro, is the laptop. I'm not showing it off just to show off my cool toys, but we recently got them at work as the laptop that staff use. And these laptops are great when they're working really well, but like anything with technology, when they stop working, they can be a real pain. And every so often, if it stops working properly, the screen refuses to turn on, we have to do a hard reset. So what we do is we hold the power button on the top and the volume button on the side, and we hold them down for 30 seconds or whatever, and it does a reset. So what it's doing in that action is it's actually saying, well, the version of the operating system and the software that I've got currently sitting in my working memory, it's of something wrong with that. So we're going to dump that. We're going to go back to our baseline firmware definitions that we've got stored on our hard disk or in the chips in the inside of that. And we're going to load that into our working memory because we know that was working well when it worked before. So I believe worship actually does a hard reset for us. We take our current thinking, our current mindset, where we're currently at. We might be bogged down with something at work or whatever, and basically we flush that, get rid of that, and we go back to the truth, what we know is real. We go back to the foundations. We go back to praising and worshipping and restoring our memory of who Jesus is. What Jesus has done for us. What he's currently doing in us or around us or in the people that are beside us. What he promises to do in the future. What he's promised to us. Restores back to who he says we are. Restores the plans that he has for us. And it restores this sense of how and why he is worthy of our honour and our praise. Why he has that worthship of our honour and our praise and our service and our sacrifice. The last passage I found was John 4:23-24. But the hour is coming. Oh, that's not where I want to go. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. I believe you can be obedient. I believe you can know your Bible back to front. But I don't think you may not actually be in a position of worship. Because God is spirit. It says it right there. Our worship must be worshipping him in spirit. Our spirit, our heart must be trying to make a connection with God. Not our head. Head's good. Heart's what he wants. The music and the arts, which is where we tend to lump the praise and worship. Now, I'm not qualified in praise and worship. I can't play a musical instrument to save myself. Apart from an iPod, I'm really good at that. But I believe that music, the arts, I believe painting is some people's way of worship. It's a natural expression of our spirit, of our heart. It's a natural way of expressing that is through music. But I believe you can worship him in many different ways. I believe you could be worshipping God by obediently vacuuming the floor of the auditorium after every service. If your spirit is connecting with God and saying, this is all for you, Jesus. This is so worth it. You're worthy of it. It could be doing the dishes after the service, after our fellowship lunch. I'm looking forward to that. Could be, thanks for throwing that for me. I feel so honoured. It could be just in your day-to-day work. It could be as you front up to your job on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning this week, and just going, I'm doing this job for Jesus. He is so worth it. And he's worth me doing this to the best of my ability. He's worth me doing this with excellence because, hey, it's all for Jesus. I think that can be worship because it's in spirit and in truth. It's just another expression of it that's not necessarily music. Now, music's a really good way of just getting your mind in the right spot, but sometimes people worship in different ways. And in truth, I think truth part of that is a truly trying to make a connection with our Father, truly trying to make a connection with Jesus from here, not from here. It's really easy to do it from here. In fact, doing it from here, I find taints worship because you can go, oh, look, that song could have been better. We missed that line. We could have done it this way. And it gets in the way. Whereas if you're going from here, you don't care. Oh, that key was off key. I don't care. It's for Jesus. Okay, especially our worship team here. You know, you guys worship as if you're worshipping for Jesus. Play as if you're playing for Jesus. Give him, he is worthy of our glory and honor and praise. He is worth it. So that's truth. I think believe is just having a connection, connecting your heart to Jesus' heart. That's about all I had, but I didn't want to leave you with, at the end of this, I prefer to give some time to let you apply, actually have a go at worship. I wanted some time for worship this morning. So I've got a song that I've pulled up. I did this purely so that the worship teams in churches tend to be there every week. They're always playing, and it starts to feel a bit like a job. I know, I don't play music, but I do the words at our church on the Gold Coast, and it can start to feel like a job. And so it's very difficult to actually get in a place of worship when it feels like just another mundane job to do. So I really wanted to release your worship team to participate in this. I picked this song, What a Beautiful Name. It's from Hillsong. I wanted to give people an opportunity to worship, but worship freely. So a few things before I put this on. I'm going to get the lights dimmed so that you can actually spend it. You know, we don't have these distractions around us. There's a chorus in this song that changes. It starts at What a Beautiful Name, but I want you to listen for it. It then changes to What a Wonderful Name, and then What a Powerful Name. And I just love the progression of that in this song. So I'm going to invite you, as this plays, to worship Jesus in reverence and awe, but also in freedom. So freedom in worship, I believe, is there aren't rules. If you want to stand, stand. If you want to sit, sit. If you want to raise your hands and praise Jesus, raise your hands and praise Jesus. If you want to kneel and submit to him and to his will, kneel and submit to him in his will. In freedom in worship, there's no judgment of the person next to you. Look at that person, they've raised their hands. We don't raise our hands in this church. That's not freedom, that's judgment. Freedom. So I want to offer an opportunity for freedom in worship. If you just want to sit there and let the words roll over you, if you want to sing along because there's words that come up on the screen, do that. But there's freedom, but there's no judgment. And then at the end of that, I'll pray and we'll finish off. So if we can get some sound.